So can you tell us more about the events that took place on November 3rd, 1920?
Okay, on November 3rd, 1920, that was the day that everybody was voting. And the records show that July Perry and Estella Perry got up that morning and they were actually able to cast their votes. And then, that the fact that they went to the poll and was successful gave everybody else the incentive and really the desire to kind of add a fuel to the fire, I guess, with why they wanted to vote. Mose Norman wanted to get his vote in, and of course, you know what happened. He got accosted and could not get in to get the vote done. But the KKK had set their militia, and they were turning everybody black away from the poll. They, threatening them with violence and just doing all kinds of scare tactics for voting. And another interesting thing about that was that the Justice of the Peace, he went fishing that day, so they couldn't pay their tax, the poll tax. So they had to drive all the way to Orlando, where Judge Cheney lived. And remember, Mose Norman was the only one that had a car. So everybody else black couldn't get to Orlando and back on foot or by horse and buggy. But Mose Norman could hop in his car, which was like one of the only cars back then. His car that was valued at about $75,000 to $100,000 by today's standards.
The Model T.
Yeah. So he got in this nice car and he drove to Judge Cheney's house to try to pay poll tax for everybody that could not vote. He would pay everybody's poll tax.
So now Judge Cheney elicited Mose Norman to write down the names of everyone who didn't have a chance to vote that day.
Yep.
So it's interesting that when July Perry was lynched, that it was within eye view of the home of Judge Cheney as not only intimidation for African Americans that day, but for their white sympathizers or people that were what they considered allies at that time. Another interesting fact is that the fact that Estella Perry voted early in the morning made her one of the first women and African American women to cast her ballot in Florida on a legal election after the women's right to vote.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of the things we need to correct, all these signs always say July Perry. July Perry was actually his nickname. His name was Julius July Perry, and July was a nickname for Julius.
Yes.
He was also an officer of Ocoee Lodge 66, as well as Mose Norman, as well as Brother Blackshear. Reverend Franks was the chaplain of the lodge. So we know that.
And Vincent Hightower, who was, Vincent Hightower, Mose Norman, and July Perry were childhood friends, and they traveled together from Travelers Rest, South Carolina, here to Ocoee. When they were coming together, they were buddies. They knew each other beforehand. They were hanging out together,
And when you say that, amongst Masons, one of the things is they always say, "I am thy brother's keeper." So when Mose Norman was being threatened that morning, he knew where he would be able to take refuge and be at the home of Julius July Perry. So when Mose Norman comes to his house, there's a scripture that says, John 15:13, that says, "No greater love than this, than he that will lay down the life for his friend." So we find that July Perry defends the would-be attackers from the angry mob, where Mose Norman tried to vote, and he pulled out his gun, and the first two that tried to enter his house, we know were killed.
Yeah, well, that story too, July Perry and his wife and his daughter defended the house. Now, they defended their house so well. I mean, Papa must have taught his daughters how to shoot, okay? They thought that they had a whole heap of black people there. There was just three people. July Perry, Julius July Perry, his wife, and his daughter. That's it. There was another farmhand and other two sons, but they were out in the barn. In fact, the farmhand that was in the barn got killed that day as well. But they fought off everybody and made them all leave. Now, the rumor is that Carita was the one that shot Sam Salisbury, and then they think that the other two white men were killed by friendly fire. They were killed, if you're shooting this way and someone's killed coming in that way, I didn't shoot you. So they really think they were killed by friendly fire.
So after that, an angry mob comes. takes July Perry here to Orlando, to the Orange County Courthouse. Now what takes place next?
Okay, so they took him first to get treated, and somewhere in there, July Perry got dragged. I was not able to tell definitively if he got dragged on the way here to the jail behind a car, or if he got dragged on the way to the lynching site behind a car, but somewhere in those trips, he was dragged behind a car. I think it was before he was taken from here to the lynching site. Because I feel, in my heart, I hope I'm correct. I hope he was already dead before they lynched him. I think he was already there because he was mortally shot at his house. So even though they shot those two white guys were killed, and he shot Sam Salisbury, July Perry was mortally wounded, and Caritha was shot in the arm. So they took him to the hospital to address his wounds, and he was already half dead. So by the time they got he would have died probably anyway. But by the time they got him to the jail, they didn't take care of him well. I mean, I can't imagine what kind of care he got. He probably got a Band-Aid, and a smack, and said told him to wake up or something. But by the time they came in here, he was half dead, and he was drugged to the lynching site, and his body was hung up. And then when they lynched him, they shot him with bullets. The coroner, there's at his site, his grave site, somebody actually scanned the land and did the sensor thing with the land, and they saw that his arm was disconnected from his body. So they either shot his arm off or dragged it off.
This is eerily similar to 3 years later. Fast forward to New Year's 1923, when the Carrier family defended themselves against a white angry mob. Aaron Carrier was brought to Gainesville police station for quote-unquote safekeeping.
Yeah.
We know that at least in that particular instance, he was able to convalesce. He was healed of his wounds. Julius July Perry was never afforded that, because he probably was most likely mortally wounded before he even got to the jail. So it's interesting.
Back then the government was corrupt. You have Clyde Pounds, who was, the Orange County Deputy Sheriff, and he's, deputizing the lynch mob. You have Sam Salisbury, who's his, in-law, his brother. They're related. Salisbury is married to a Pounds, so they're related by marriage. And he's, leading the lynch mob, and he too was a former chief of police, and he had other things he did. He was actually mayor in 1954. He became mayor before he was. So, and then his family goes forward, in a Coe government, and you see them, and then here at the jail, Frank Gordon, was the jailer that handed over the keys, So it was it wasn't just angry white men, it was angry government officials who also were white men who were oppressing the black people. It wasn't just men, it was powerful men.
And so tell us a little bit about the executor of the July Perry estate.
Okay, the executive of July Perry estate was named Blooper Sims. Now, Blooper Sims, we know, is the one that, had the one that he employed them, and they worked for him at some point. Then he started buying land. He also got jealous of them and felt like he had ownership of them. He treated them like they were slaves, not like they were free men. So he wanted, what he started some of the whole chaos that happened, because he was a part of it all. You see him clearly afterwards, selling off the land, about the Negroes that suddenly just happened to leave beautiful pieces of land. And he's selling land, the same land that's accounted for as July Perry's land. Blooper Sims himself was declared insane 2 years later as well. So he had dementia. So he was probably already a little bit, in 1920, a little bit touched with dementia. I mean, I know dementia. I work in healthcare. I know dementia. So I'm pretty sure that he was already touched some kind of way with the dementia before he was declared insane. He hadn't gotten to the advanced state to be declared, insane. But his daughter took over the estate, and she was sued by the Perry family in 24, and I believe in that late, like 24, 26. And she was also sued again in the 50s for the land. Each time she didn't produce the documents. She would produce the documents, and they didn't enforce it.
What else I find interesting was, since we do know that legally July Perry and Estelle Perry voted that day, that meant their property taxes were up to date.
That's right.
So when we look at after the lynching of July Perry, everyone comes out of the woodwork laying claim to the July Perry estate. So he would not have been able to, but he would not have been able to even pay his poll tax if his property tax was
That's
behind.
right.
So, we find all these people who came out of the woodwork laying claim to the Perry estate, which would be worth millions today.
Yeah.
And then when the Perry family finally settled, I believe it was 7 members, got a little over $100 each in 1924.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
of $1 million, so the original mark was $10, but they received it at the actual Orange Grove. And then when the final estate was settled, they only received about $100 each.
Yep.
And the Sims family recorded most of that wealth during that time.
Yep, they acquired all that wealth. So that property has gone over to be turned over and stayed in the Sims family over and over and over. They acquired all that.
So they was able to acquire what we call generational wealth off the lynching of July Perry, aided and abetted by the county clerk Robinson.
Yes.
Whose name is right here on this courthouse on the cornerstone.
Yep.
He aided and abetted the documents.
He did. You see Robinson, B.M. Robinson, Benjamin Moore, is B.M. Robinson. You also see William Blakely signing, notarizing and signing a lot of documents. And these are pillars of the city. I mean, you have all the people that, how could they win? And you have the police are corrupt. You have the city clerks are corrupt. Everybody in the whole government is corrupt. And you're supposed to serve under these people. How could they win? It was impossible.
Now, one of the other things I find really interesting, Mose Norman, Blackshear, Franks, Perry, there is no evidence at all that they were illiterate. We see some of their signatures, they were able to sign their own name. Estelle Perry, there's no evidence that she was ever illiterate.
No.
So having an X for her name of signing over July Perry's property is troublesome.
Very troublesome. Very troublesome. That there was no way they were illiterate people. These were rich men.
Correct.
These were rich men. They were trading. July Perry was a labor leader. He had people coming. He was like a job agency. Where you go and you sub out, like a staffing service.
As evident by the 1915 Orlando Sentinel recording that he was paying other people's property tax.
Yes.
As it recorded by the Orlando Sentinel in the newspaper.
Pay their property taxes.
And we also know that he was basically a labor leader where they didn't have it unionized, but they did go through July Perry was a de facto union president where when people wanted to be employed with all the truck farmers and the orange groves in the Coe, they would go through July Perry. He would be the one to assign them work. So these were not illiterate men. So a lot of these, lack of a better word, shenanigans that took place after his lynching was what they were really after all along was this generational wealth.
They were.
Mose Norman's Model T is the only known Model T in Orange County at this time. So you have a black man driving around in this Model T when most people are still riding, their white counterparts are still riding around in horse and carriage.
That's right.
Or riding horses. You had Mose Norman riding around the Model T, which created a lot of anger.
Yes, absolutely. And Mose Norman liked to dress well. He was a man of class. From what I can tell about stories, he was a man of class.
One of the things that people overlook is this generation after slavery, right? So we find that this generation that was born free men are taking back what it was lost from, stolen from their ancestors. So this wealth, ownership, property ownership, being well-dressed, being well-spoken was extremely important to them because they were taking back what was stripped from them, or stripping from their ancestors. So, and you find a lot of these people like the White family from Jacksonville, Clara White, that dedicated her life as a former slave, giving her daughter the finest things in life. She was Eartha White was highly educated, a famous opera singer who used her fame to speak in front of the Prime Minister of Ireland, England, the Premier of Italy, to condemning lynchings in America to put pressure on foreign countries to come and defend African Americans against their own government. You know, and then one of the final things we'll talk about from this site is that the Masonic connection continues. So after this is investigated by the NAACP, James Weldon Johnson, who was president of the NAACP, I mean, he was the secretary of the NAACP, with Captain James Floyd, who was a famous captain during the Cuba Libre, goes to St. Augustine, Florida, where Warren G. Harding just won this election that he fought so hard for, and they go and get an audience with Warren G. Harding and demand that he support anti-lynching legislation. So as a direct result of not only the right to vote, it was the July Perry lynching actually put Warren G. Harding on the front page of handling these anti-lynching legislation. Next, we're going to come to you live from the actual site.
Yeah.